There's another whole category where we start to realize that everything in our experience, every circumstance that we see or encounter, everything that sort of hooks us emotionally or grinds our gears, as you would, is really a reflection of part of our own disowned parts. Let's say you come back and you are all lit up. You're on fire. You have got all of the insights. You've solved some of the internal issues. You've become inspired and you are ready to share that, because that's what we want to do. When we feel happy, we want to share that with someone. Why? Because proximity magnifies emotion. That also goes the other way. People say misery likes company. I disagree. I think misery likes miserable company. So, if you are staring at a sunset, for example, and you're feeling joy, you want to hold somebody's hand to be able to share that with, so it lights you up. That's when 1 + 1 becomes 11. So we always want to share high emotional states, whether that's a way of release or bonding through victimhood, or whether that's a way of being able to help other people share in some of the insights that we've got from seminars or books or general inspiration in our meditations, anything like that. But here's what happens. See if you can relate to this. You come back and you're all lit up, you're on fire with life. And you spend some time, you walk in your family, you have your partner here, and you spend some time, and because your enthusiasm is there, bang, you get lit up. And they get lit up, and now they're on fire as well, because you come in as a force for nature and you're so excited, so happy, and you want to share it. And what happens then? You spend some time, with your kids. Oop, there we go. Kids are always running around, right? And you inspire your kids, and then you go over and you spend time with your friends, and you inspire your friends. But guess what? You come back to your spouse, and after a little while, some of the light goes out. People don't get motivated anymore. They're like, oh God, I was all happy and now it's gone. They go in these waves of like, oh wow, you're in my space, I enjoy this, and then they don't. And I learned this many years ago when I used to spend time with people and get them excited because they would spend their time talking about their favorite subject, which is themselves, and usually the favorite part of their favorite subject, which is why their life doesn't work. And as a student of personal growth and development since I was 17, by my sort of mid-20s, I had years of experience on how to solve problems, how to set goals, how to overcome challenges. And that enthusiasm would hone in on somebody that was telling me their problems. So I would sort of fire hose them with all of the strategies that I knew, and my enthusiasm would rub off on their enthusiasm. And then guess what would happen? Let's say I'd recommend a book like Think and Grow Rich. And I'd leave them in the bar and they're all excited, and I'd go away and I'd be feeling good about myself because I helped somebody else. I lit their candle. And what would happen? A week later, I'd see that person again. I'd be like, oh wow, how are you getting on with the book? And they'd be like, oh yeah, what was the name of the author again? And they're gone, their light's gone out. And I realized that if I spent my life trying to light everybody else's candle, it would be exhausting and ultimately fruitless. You see, the key, my friends, to inspire other people is not by trying to help them, not by trying to impose your model of the world onto them, not by trying to tell them what works, because all they're hearing is that what I'm doing right now isn't working, isn't good enough, and therefore it triggers the fear they're not enough. So what do? They may get inspired in the moment, but they won't accept the awareness deep down. Why? Because the cost of awareness is responsibility, and most people are just not ready to take that yet. What you can do if you want to help, which I know you do, is a different strategy. And when I discovered this, it changed everything in my life. It stopped me being exhausted trying to help other people by going and fixing them or going to try and help them, or even if they wanted to help. Instead, what I concentrated on was being the best version of myself that I could be, to shine my candle as brightly as I could. And when I would walk through the room, at that point, those that were ready to light would light. Those that weren't, wouldn't. Because now I'm leading by example and invitation. And when you start living your life by being the example and the invitation without worrying about what everybody else does, whether they're following you, whether they're not, whether they agree with you, whether they don't, they're on their journey. When you become the example and the invitation, what you don't want to be is being somebody who tells other people how they should be, but you're not embodying that in your own life, because that is disingenuous and it'll never, ever have a long-term impact. Instead, shine your candle so brightly that when you walk through the room, those that are ready to light will spontaneously combust. And I promise you, you'll live a far less stressful and a far more joyous life, and impact far more people around you for the long-term greater good. I was a marksman for the ACF for a long time, and we'd travel away every weekend on ranges, whether we were sighting sniper rifles for the police. I remember at one point we had some fun, or we were essentially just practicing for high-level competition. And this is open sights, 600 meters, no telescopic optics or anything like that. And 600 meters, that's 6 football pitches end to end, and you've got to get around the size of your fingernail in something the size of a tennis ball.
Wow.
And that's not just it's not just the actual ability to shoot. You've got to judge and interpret wind. Predominantly is the biggest factor there as well. So and that was within the Army Cadets, and then those guys became strong friends. We'd travel away together a lot, and we would meet every single year at the same time at the same place, and it would always be the Saturday before Christmas, and be the same bar at the same time. And we started that when we were, I think, 17 years old.
Amazing.
And I've missed 4 years in 30. And these are the people that I would call if all hell broke loose, and have done on occasion. In fact, at a specific time, which I'm not going to go into now, but will be revealed in one of my upcoming books, which is more my autobiography at a certain time that I'll allude to, that I was in a bit of trouble and made a telephone call. And the first response back after a few hours was, do you have the budget to essentially, the conversation, listen, we spoke to several members of the SAS, and they're willing to put you in a Hercules, right? They know I'm an advanced skydiver, halo me out at 16,000 feet, 18,000 feet, with oxygen, land in a certain ocean, get picked up by a rigid radar and taken to shore in order to get you out of the trouble you're in right now. And but it's $100,000. And at that time I'm like, dude, if I had $100,000, I would pay that. That sounds so awesome. That is real life James Bond shit right there. But
you're not in danger just for the sake of it.
Why not? And anyway, within a few more hours, they got a whole different plan, and it was and we put it into plan, executed. And these are the guys I'd call if literally if I was being held at gunpoint, or if I had a problem, or my cat was stuck up a tree at 2 a.m. Those are the guys I would call. So we've got a very deep friendship. It was a small core group of us, but again, every year for 30 years this year we've met. And it's those kind of friendships are very, very deep. I've had strong friendships in skydiving because that builds a certain bond. You get in an airplane and at 12,000 feet, the red light comes on, you turn to the person next to you and you say, can you give me a kit check? And he checks your pin and he checks your straps and everything else. And he taps you on the shoulder and gives you a thumbs up. He's basically saying you're good to go. And you're trusting him with your life. Now, and that builds a very interesting connection. It's a very interesting fraternity among skydivers that really has a special bond. Apart from the fact we're all loopy-loo because we want to jump out of airplanes. And we've got a certain sort of adrenaline rush that we get out of that, and a certain affinity for embracing uncertainty. But that little tap on the shoulder, you're trusting someone. Like, how many times do you do that? 5 times a day? It is an interesting question, but I don't think I could pick 3. Obviously, the deepest friends you want to be, I guess for me have been the people I've been closest to, like say my partner or my parents. But you go through levels of evolution, and for different reasons, and you either fall out because somebody doesn't fit your pictures, or something happens, and you then have rules that backed up by pride that you then keeps you from re-engaging. You see that a lot, or you just grow out. Again, like I've said on relationships, the purpose of a relationship is not to be happy. It's not to expect somebody else to make you happy. Essentially a crucible for learning how to embrace your own disowned parts and foster a level of unconditional love. And to the degree that you're able to do that, and that degree you'll have an incredible relationship. The degree that you resist that, to the degree that you put rules around it, to the degree that you judge somebody else for not fitting your pictures or try to control them, and to that degree you're going to get presented lessons for you to transcend. There's many different aspects to why relationships end on there. But for best friends, I think my dad once said, if you can count them on one hand, you're lucky. Relationships are based a lot of the time on 2 things, proximity and chemistry. And then they evolve. Another question that I get asked, which often makes me smile, is, how do you go about understanding other people, especially when you think what they're doing is wrong? Now, the reason I smile about that is because there's so many different ways to answer this question. One of the things to really take note of, though, is that I want to introduce you to a concept called categories. There are categories of judgment. There are categories of understanding, and some are appropriate and some are not. And if you see somebody who is acting out of accordance with, let's just say, your projections and your model of the world as to what you think they should or shouldn't be doing, then one has to, first of all, realize a fundamental truth that they're not doing it on purpose. They are acting out their scenario based on their thoughts, their belief system, their model of the world. In other words, everybody does things for reasons. It's a psychological fact. Now, unfortunately, they may not be your reasons and they may not be my reasons. But when we understand people do things for reasons, rather than jump straight in and say, oi, one has to then step back and say, okay, what are the reasons I think this person's doing? Why? Because context is definitive, my friends. You want to tattoo that on your eyelids. Context is everything. And when we judge somebody based upon content without taking into account context, then we are missing all of the backstory. And backstory means everything. Why would you go and see somebody who is grabbing a child by the scruff of the neck and dragging them? And you say, oh my God, look what that person's doing. But if you see that they just drag them out of the way of a moving bus, you'd have a different level of context, different level of understanding. The great Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, somebody I was blessed to share the stage with before he died. I remember him telling the story about when it first really was brought home to him, this concept, and he wrapped it up in one of the 7 habits he called seek first to understand and then be understood. And it really dawned on him when he was riding a subway and you got all of these kids running around sort of screaming, and the father was there and he just wasn't controlling the kids and he was getting annoyed, and he'd had a hard day at work, and he really just turned around to the guys down and says, look, any chance, can you control your kids? And the guy looked up at him and said, I'm so sorry. He says, we just got back from the hospital, their mother just died. He says, and right now I don't think they know how to handle it. Boom, in that moment, complete shift of context. So when we look at other people and we think they're doing something wrong, the first thing to do before we jump in and say, oi, is to try to understand what is the context, what is the backstory, what are the reasons they're doing it for? Are they coming from hurt? Are they coming from a lack of understanding? Are they coming from a place that, if you understood, you would agree? And that's really a reflection of our own stuff, which is the next part I want to talk about in terms of categories. There's one category in terms of understanding, the level that other people do things for different reasons. There's another whole category where we start to realize that everything in our experience, every circumstance that we see or encounter, everything that sort of hooks us emotionally or grinds our gears, as you would, is really a reflection of part of our own disowned parts. Now, the challenge as to why people don't like hearing that is because it imposes upon us a self-responsibility to look in the mirror and see what our weaknesses are, what our areas to work on are. And most people don't want to do that. It's far easier and takes far less courage to be able to point fingers of blame at other people and say, well, you'd be better if you did this, or if you'd be better if you were like that. We see it all the time in relationships. I've certainly been guilty of that myself in many relationships. And to be able to say, okay, this person shouldn't be like, I fought traffic, I got up early, I could have stayed in bed an extra 20 minutes, why aren't they here? Classic example. We start imposing our model of the world in terms of punctuality on other people. Well, A, we don't know the context, but B, what's really going on there is what a part of our disowned self is showing up in our face that we're not willing to include. See, if we are willing to not be unpunctual ourselves, what's going on there? We're instantly going to judge other people. Somebody's late for our meeting, we're going to slag them off, we're going to criticize them, we're going to label that person a certain way, being disrespectful or lazy or whatever it may be. And what we're really saying is we can't accept that part of ourselves. And I'm here to tell you that until you can accept that part of yourself, all of these scenarios in the outer world are going to show up to remind you. Everyone's trying to be on this personal development world where we start running off on this, I want to be better, I want to do this, I want to do that to improve myself. And the method or the path that most people take is by being able to ignore their weaknesses or work on their weaknesses, but not include them. I'll give you a classic example. If you open the dictionary There are so many words in the English dictionary that can describe character traits. Some would be positive character traits, others we could deem as negative character traits. But are you or are you not at some point in your life, or have you not been every single one of those? So if somebody shows up who's angry, or somebody cuts you up in traffic, have we not been that person? But because we're not that person at that particular time, we want to judge them. So how do you understand that? You first understand that A, they do it for reasons. And if we were them, that person at that time, with their model of the world, thinking their thoughts, with their history, we would do exactly the same. Fact, psychological fact. And until we can own that, we have absolutely no right to judge. Until you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes and come to the same conclusion that would lead to the same actions and behaviors, then we have absolutely no right to judge. But of course, that would take us being able to, step outside of our comfort zone. And it's far easier to just point fingers at blame, as we've all done. So understanding that life offers us a consistent 24/7 mirror, a feedback mechanism that allows us to see where our disowned parts are, where our weak spots are, where our areas of judgment are, allows us to really open our mind and come from a place of understanding, not compassion.